Ancient Greeks told us to know thyself, know who you really are underneath all the masks, underneath all the projections, underneath all the facades that you put up. Who are you really fundamentally? What's your core true identity? Might seem like a trivial question or a philosophical one, but I think it's a question that everyone needs to answer for themselves. And I know in my personal life, growing up, I had struggled with a lot of divergent identities, so I would be this generally nerdy, bookish guy, but then I lived in Eastern Europe residential block, typical Soviet multi-story buildings, and I had to go outside as a kid, play around with the boys, the guys, and had to fit in. You don't want to stick out too much. You had to adapt. You have to put on this persona. So early on in your childhood, you start combining and struggling with different, sometimes contradictory identities, and then it escalated further because I was also brought up as a Christian. We were Protestant conservative Christians, which was somewhat unusual for that area where I grew up in. So I was this Sunday school kid getting steeped in theological understanding of the Bible and was really interested in it as well. And then, I was hanging out with delinquents. So, especially growing up, teenager, early adulthood, six-pack with the boys, some stogies, and then back to church on Sunday. Hypocrite, saint, and a sinner, an academic, and a delinquent. I had to combine all these identities. I had to struggle with how do I square them away. I had to balance them. It was exhausting. And it all really came to a pivotal point or an inflection point when I started dating my now wife. I had to start thinking seriously about who am I really like, because I can't make this girl fall in love with me for some sort of projection of confidence, projection of success. It has to be my real self. It has to be the real me. But by that point, I already lost track of who I am deep down underneath. Like I was like, who am I? Am I a nerd who's hanging out with these engineers at school, at college, but I'm also the same guy who can go and hang out with guys with criminal records at the end of the night and feel like I'm one of them, for both. They seem to be contradictory, but I ended up kind of balancing out all these different divergent identities of myself, but it was exhausting. And it's almost like this bipolar behavior of sorts. If you believe in astrology, I was a Gemini, maybe as a two-faced homie who's just able to feel comfortable in all these different circles, all the different scenarios, not having an issue with them. But I think as you get older, you really need to undergirth your identity under a set of core ideas, a set of core values that you believe in, right? You have to start asking the difficult questions of like, hey, what lights me up inside? What would I do if no one else would be watching? If I would be fully independent from the outside critic, the imaginary outside external critic that sits there and judges me, what would I do? How would I act? What kind of identity would I undertake? And I think maybe it's a normal part of the developmental process where as a teenager, you rebel a little bit, you push the boundaries to figure out who you can be, how you can operate in this world. But some people get stuck in that adolescent type of behavior where they're still being carried by the wind to and fro, never really settling into their core identity, never really locking into their adult developed identity. And I'm not saying that you have to become this static, rigid person who is unable to change. What I'm saying is you can be a shapeshifter, a chameleon, going through your life, putting on different masks, being a people pleaser, adapting yourself to different rooms, constantly wiggling, being the sleazy type of guy. You have to get to a point where people can depend on you, where you are predictable, where they understand that, hey, this guy has integrity. And integrity not in the sense of honesty, even though I feel like I was a fairly honest person. Integrity means, at least in my mind, being able to add up all these different identities, take the best part out of each one of them and integrate them, add them up under the same roof of your core beliefs, core values. Understand that you can be a complex individual. You don't have to be this binary good, bad. You can hold some of the conflicting beliefs at the same time. You can integrate different aspects of yourself. You don't exist in absolutes like good, bad. You're somewhere in between, Every day you're going to struggle with your higher self and your lower self, your flesh and your spirit, right? You have your primal urgencies and tendencies, but then you have your goals and your discipline. And so it is okay to kind of balance that out. What you don't want to have is a person who is so lost in all the facades and all the masks that he's wearing, to where he can't establish a lasting relationship, a lasting friendship, because he's not consistent, right? And it's almost some sort of mental illness, like being bipolar or something like that, where you're constantly shifting, changing for who? Changing for an outside observer, wearing a mask that fits best in that certain room. There's obviously value in being able to read the room. Like, you don't have to spill out your soul at a water cooler at work and hit people with your existential crisis, right? There's time and place for that. You have to be in a framework of a trusting relationship with a friend, with your significant other, where you can share some of the deeper struggles that you're going through. But you got to get to know yourself. You got to understand that your core identity has to be defined. Your values have to be clearly defined for yourself. And you have to stand on something. You have to be undergirded by something. You can't just float to and fro. That's a childish way of being in this world. As a man, as an adult, you got to lock in, figure out your values, figure out your identity. It's okay to have a complex identity. The main thing is you got to be true to yourself.